Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
Joel Jacobsen of Burlington is a Democratic candidate in the 63rd Assembly District. The election is November 3. Joel, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Good morning, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
On August 25th, you posted this on social media. We must stop, quoting, "We must stop systemic racism and bias devastating Black families." So, as you know, one of my questions is about policing reforms. There are dozens of proposals in the Capitol. So let me ask you this. What specific policing reforms do you think must be enacted into law? Please.
Well, but of course, we had the 9 from Governor Evers,
yes,
as well as I took a review also at the Wisconsin Police Association. There's some great ideas, and I really appreciate that the Police Association has put in their input into that, and there's some great ideas. I think one of the things that we ask our police to do too much. And one of the relative to that, in that, especially from the association, is other alternatives, getting other entities involved in our policing. And of course, all the other things relative to training, the chokehold question, I know is a big one. But it looks like we've got movement. We've got some great proposals out there. Now we need to put them into action.
Okay. You also say on your website, mask up, which tells me how you hope a judge rules on, which tells me how that you hope a judge on Monday, when he's hearing a injunction question, you hope he orders that the governor's extended mask order is upheld.
Oh, of course. I mean, without question, Wisconsin is a hot spot. This morning, I think we had 19 dead or 17 dead. That we are a global hotspot, and we need to react better. And I think the way we need to do that is settle down the rhetoric and really go for the science. And we can't do that when we keep having these partisan discussions about it's a constitutional issue, or it's I don't have to do this. I think if we keep the mask mandate up, we help our businesses so that there is no question when you walk into a business or a group situation. I think it also involves education of people, that it's a probability game. Neither of you and I are young. We're much more likely as far as to get COVID. And so I look at, we've turned down weddings. There's large grouping things. And we don't want to do that. I want to go see my daughter in Brisbane, Australia. I can't do that because right now we are a hot spot, and we need to keep educating our people and keep talking about the science and follow the scientists.
Well, we are setting a record for the number of hospitalizations, more than 600 in Wisconsin. Right. So here's my question. If you're in the legislature voting on the next state budget, do hospitals deserve an even greater priority than they may have in the current one, Joel?
Oh, of course. They are under great strain. And I noticed in Green Bay, there's this discussion about creating additional tents, that type of stuff, because they're expecting an overflow. They're starting to max out. So that the hospitals obviously to deserve that. And of course, the first thing that we need to do is approve the Medicaid expansion, because that'll put over $300 million into our budget to help those hospitals.
A bill introduced 3 weeks ago in the legislature says that if a charity, if a business, an organization complies with COVID-19 protocols, they could not be sued over COVID-19. Is that a bill you could vote for?
Everything I've heard at this point, the short answer is no. I'd like to take a closer look at it. But what we're looking at right now is that I think most businesses I think, comply. They want to do the right thing. They want to protect their employees. But the look at that via the legislation and versus what we've got now as far as the courts, I think we'll let the courts do what they need to do and not put in that legislation at the moment.
One more question on the pandemic. If it cut state tax collections, and I'll make up the number of $1 billion, if we didn't collect $1 billion because of the slower economy, how would you as a legislator make up a $1 billion shortfall?
Okay, well, I already mentioned the Medicaid, so that's 300 plus.
Yep.
We need to look at what, first of all, I heard one of the representatives say we do have a rainy day fund. And certainly I think what else is a bigger rainy day than COVID? And so I think that needs to be approached. Where are we looking at? I know that the discussion was it's only been about 1% shortfall. And that a lot of the reps seem to be very confident we aren't going to be in that $1 billion shortfall. That being said, if we are, nothing's off the table, including taking a look at our tax reform. We are in a situation in the United States, and I think Wisconsin parallels this. 45% of the entire net worth of our country is owned by the 1%. I think there's some people who can give up some dollars here to help us get through COVID and then move us toward a middle-class economy, which we've been going away for, a lot of people say 40 years.
Do you support the governor's proposal for what he calls a People's Maps Commission to draw the next congressional and legislative district lines and forward them to the legislature to be enacted into law? Excuse me.
Yes, I fully agree. I think one of the most destructive aspects of our current makeup politically is the unconstitutional, as it has been determined in some courts, on the fair maps. It is probably the number one destructive aspect of our current situation in governance. Right now, the reps do not have to be responsive to the constituents because they're locked in. And so I think that we need to get to a situation where we have more competitive districts, and that applies both Democratic and Republican, so that our representatives will move to a more functional governance.
As more states around Wisconsin legalize medical and recreational marijuana, what's your position?
Certainly medical marijuana, there's no question about it. And I think every resolutions that we've seen, the referendums we've seen at the county level have always favored especially medical. And I don't believe there's been one loss on recreational as well. One of my thoughts on recreational is that since we can't have a statewide referendum, why not have maybe a simultaneous county non-binding referendums to see where everybody's at relative to recreational? The other thing that's important to consider is we are 28th in the world for incarceration rate. Remember, repeat that, 28th in the world, not 28th in the United States. And I've seen Evan Goike's presentations. We can do a lot, and that will certainly be another way to help us cut costs, not to mention the human toll of having such a high incarceration rate.
Let's talk about property taxes, which Wisconsin has high property taxes, and that's the reason for more than 20 years, local governments and school districts have had to live with caps and limits on their property taxes. If you're in the legislature voting on the next state budget, would you continue those caps and limits on property tax levies?
At this point, I think that what we need to do is allow the local governments more leeway than they've had. And so with that in consideration, I know that the narrative in the Republican Party is that local control is what we're for. But in fact, there's been like 160 different local control or override of local control over the past 10 years. So we really need to allow our local governments do what they need to do and release and make sure that we're getting a more responsive government at the local and the state level.
So you like Representative Goike's bill that would let, if Milwaukee residents passed a referendum, let the city of Milwaukee levy a 50-cent sales tax. I think that's appropriate. Again, you need to look at that at every local level, whether it's Racine County or Milwaukee County or any other county in Wisconsin, that
they need relief in certain situations, and I think that minor sales tax increases is okay. Again, sales tax is typically a regressive tax, and I'm most typically opposed to that, but we're in an unusual situation and we need to look for every source of revenue we can.
When we talk about taxes, the governor recommended raising our fuel tax gallon. It's 30.9 cents per gallon. Hasn't been increased in 10 or 12 years. Could you support raising the gas tax to stabilize how we pay for highways and bridges?
Not to that level. I think maybe 10 cents might be appropriate. I always look at the regressiveness, and so what was put in was fees adjusted to your vehicles. So either way, you ended up paying for it. So we need to consider solutions like if you're buying a $50,000 SUV, perhaps on your licensing, you should pay a little more than the person that has to buy a $3,000 vehicle to try to get to work. So those are various types of solutions we need to look at. But again, I always look at the regressiveness of a tax and to try to rebuild our middle class.
If a school district or a local government plans a major public works project, should they have to give a preference to Wisconsin businesses, Joel?
Well, I think certainly we need to keep the tax money of Wisconsin in Wisconsin as much as we possibly can. Obviously, there are situations where there's a service that a government entity needs that is that you can't find in state. That's totally appropriate. But where it is possible, we need to keep our tax dollars in our state, and we also need to pay attention to prevailing wage because, again, I don't want to sound like the broken record, but if you're focusing on rebuilding a middle class, that's part of the way to do that. And of course, we want to serve Wisconsin citizens first.
Any other issues central to your campaign that I haven't asked you about that you want to cite right now?
No, not at this point. We can move on.
Okay, last question. Differences between you and your opponent on November 3?
My opponent is a movement conservative who cut his teeth with Newt Gingrich. And what we're seeing in this current election is that in movement conservatism, it's ideology and party that takes precedence, not the United States, not the state of Wisconsin. And so the orientation has been lately towards not as electing a Republican again for governor. And that's been the primary focus, like Mitch McConnell did. So I'd say my opponent is very much a Mitch McConnell type person. And I don't think he is keeping the value of the state, the welfare of our state as his priority. The repeated situation all the way since 2010, whether you want to talk about gerrymandering or forcing an April 7th election, none of this is oriented towards the welfare of our state. It's oriented towards electing the next governor as a Republican, and it's very destructive.
Joel Jacobsen of Burlington is a Democratic candidate in the 63rd Assembly District. The election is November 3. Joel, thank you for talking to WisconsinEye.
Always a pleasure, Steve. Thank you very much.
Have a good day. Thanks.
You too.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.